for most of that. This presentation is brought to you by some of us, Communist Workers League. To say a few words about us, we stand for the revolutionary overthrow of the capitalist class and its state. We like to take the banks, factories, warehouses, stores, transportation system, offices, healthcare system, utilities, natural resources, all of that away from the tiny, super wealthy class of capitalists and put it all in the hands of the multinational working class of the world and the oppressed masses of humanity, so we can own and run them in a planned and rational manner in order to meet people's needs, not to meet the profit by exploitation of the majority. We do the work of the world, and we deserve, what we create, all of it, all of us. So that's just a few words about us. My name is Jerry Scarpatulo. I'm going to be moderating tonight's presentation. And I'm a retired union organizer and activist. And tonight we're going to be talking about the current concern of inflation that seems to be rampant everywhere there. That's my cat that's making a lot of noise. Pardon me for that. So we'd like to first introduce our main speaker, who's going to be getting us started with a bit of Marxist economics, something we don't really get a lot of these days. He is Mr. Chris Fry. He's a longtime activist in many anti-war, anti-racist, anti-fascist, and trade union struggles. He's a former steel worker, warehouse worker, and assembly line worker at the now closed Chrysler Lynch Road plant. He's a former UAW shop steward, bargaining committeeman, and strike vice chairman. He's a member of the Communist Workers League and a writer on its web newsletter, Fighting Words, which we urge you to check out at fightingwords.net. Just a couple of words. We're going to be organizing this meeting, and those of us who would like to speak on a progressive stack basis. If you don't know what that means, it means that, among other things, that we allow one person to speak, and before they get to speak again, another person who hasn't spoken gets to speak. Also, that we recognize the historical fact that women and people among oppressed communities are often put to the back of speakers lists everywhere. So we will also take that into account. So we don't anticipate any problems, but we ask everybody to show a lot of respect, one and all, as we are all workers here, and we're just trying to make a better world. So let's keep that in mind. So with that, I think I'd like to turn it over to Chris to get us started. Chris, you want to start?
Thank you very much, Jerry. In a keynote speech at the Federal Reserve's annual Jackson Hole Economic Symposium last Friday, unelected Fed Chairman Powell said, quote, "While higher rates, interest rates, slower growth, and softer labor market conditions will bring down inflation, they will also bring some pain to households. How dare he? We are now paying the sky-high prices that big oil and agribusiness charges, and then we're supposed to quietly accept losing our jobs and incomes." Note how Paul gave his announcement in a plush mountain hideout away from any threat of protests. Our class does face skyrocketing prices. Let me get this up. Okay. I have this thing here. Okay. 9.1% overall year-to-year inflation in June, and 8.5% in July. Food prices rose 10.9%. And as you can see from this chart, they were over a lot of items. The 12-month price increase included a 38% jump for eggs, 26.4% for butter, 15.6% for milk, and 13.7% for bread. Shrinkflation, where quantity is reduced when price remains the same, is more and more prevalent. In July, the nationwide median asking rent was $2,100 a month nationally, which is 31% greater than July last year. Foreclosures are increasing, as are evictions. Energy cost is a big spike. I have the arrow over the latest numbers. The price of gasoline increased 44% in the 12 months ending in July, compared to 59.9% increase in June. Electricity rose 15.2%, natural gas rose 30%, fuel oil rose a whopping 75%. And this is going to be even more dire when winter comes, especially for natural gas and fuel oil. Globally, prices are rising all over the world. And how long will inflation last? Don't hold your breath. Powell said that it will be as long as necessary to bring inflation down to a 2% rate. Now, bourgeois economists stumbled describing inflation's cause. The economy, they say, is weird, is their refrain, which means imperialism's institutions have lost their grip on the situation. Quote, even top economists are struggling to explain perhaps the weirdest economy Americans have ever lived through. CNN's chief media correspondent, Brian Stelter, said on reliable sources. That admission cost him his job. Paul Krugman, a Nobel laureate and economist and a longtime columnist in the New York Times, said the economy is not in recession, but added that distinction doesn't even matter. Quote, jobs are abundant, although maybe the job market is weakening. Inflation is high, though maybe inflation is coming down. What does it matter whether you use the R word, recession, or not? Unquote. One could almost excuse the confusion of these well-heeled and well-paid ruling class apologists until one realizes their primary role in a capitalist crisis like we are currently facing. Get this out of here. Like we are currently facing is to hide its true causes behind a shroud of deceptive phrases like supply chain issues, too much income for the workers, supply and demand, and so on and so on. But what does Marxism say about inflation and its causes? In an era of competitive capitalism, Karl Marx did state that prices in general are generally anchored by the amount of labor power to create a commodity. But Marx also said, quote, all past history proves that whenever such a depreciation of money occurs, the capitalists are on the alert to seize this opportunity for defrauding the worker. Year depression, how they could inflate prices. He goes on to say, crisis of every kind, economic crisis most frequently, towards monopoly. Capitalists use depressions to wipe out their competitors and create monopolies. Lenin also said that the evolution of capitalism into imperialism not only involved the creation of vast industrial and monopolies, but the development of what he called finance capital, huge banks that have taken control of the entire system. When monopolies and finance capital, when investment banks can take control of the system, that means speculation and fraud. Their subprime mortgage fraud fiasco in 2008 9 million jobs. Now, two current inflation causes which the corporate media seldom discusses, one of which is the US imposed tariffs on goods made in People's Republic of China, paid for by the US working class, estimated to add at least 0.5% to the inflation rate. Trump set tariffs on Chinese goods at 25%, and Biden has not rolled those back, despite all the spike in inflation. And then there's Pentagon spending, money thrown away for weapons and war. From Vox.com, Congress in December 2021, approved what is by some measures the biggest defense spending bill in history, to the tune of $768 billion. It's bigger than those passed during the Vietnam and Korean War years, and bigger than Ronald Reagan's military buildup. The proxy war in Ukraine is designed to seize EU oil and gas markets from Russia, and of course, along with it, get higher gas prices and revenues from here and abroad, particularly in the EU. Let's look at the huge spike in gasoline prices, which has put such a burden on our families. Okay. Investment banks' derivative swap speculation greatly amplified price hikes at the pump, profiting both big oil and big banks. Particularly in the spring and early this summer, derivatives on Wall Street are like poker chips at a casino. Essentially, they are bets on how some investment price will go up or down. They are unregulated, and they have nothing to do with the actual value of oil or the value of labor put into making oil. Oil futures are contracts with a future delivery date between oil monopolies and their customers, typically oil distributors or other customers like airlines. The Dodd-Frank bill, passed after the 2008 subprime mortgage scandal, had provisions to keep investment banks and their derivative speculation out of the commodities market. But the Bankers Trade Group, the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, found a way around Dodd-Frank, using phantom foreign subsidiaries to pump up the price, particularly after the Russian special military operation in February. They have greatly amplified price hikes that we see at the pump, far beyond normal. Now, the imperialism's solution to inflation is austerity. Raise interest rates, spark a recession, cause massive layoffs. Axios.com stated today that for inflation to fall to more acceptable levels within the next few years, that is according to the Fed, as close as possible to their 2% target, unemployment would need to spike to a minimum of 4.6% or as high as 6.7%. That translates to a loss of between 1.7 million and 5.3 million jobs. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, who was a lot behind the subprime mortgage fiasco, has argued that it will take unemployment of 5% for 5 years to contain inflation. Powell admitted this will not lower food or fuel prices, but recessions and depressions are useful to the ruling class. Since the Great Recession, the Federal Reserve kept the corporate borrowing interest rate low and bought corporate bonds to rescue corporations. This kept low profit zombie companies, they're called, 20% of all the big companies on Wall Street afloat, raising rates and dumping the bonds that they had accumulated, that they bought during the pandemic, which the Fed is now doing, will drive many of these zombie companies into bankruptcy, causing the layoffs of 2 million workers or more. Some analysts are calling this the zombie apocalypse. Monopolies then can pick up the pieces and get more dominant. Recessions and depressions are used to attack oppressed people's struggles and union movements. The 1873 Depression was used to end Reconstruction. The post-World War I Depression was used for the Red Scare repression and lynchings of African Americans. It took years of the Depression, the 1930s Depression, to finally spark the great union organizing drives. And Trumpism, what it is designed for, these culture wars, are used to fight a class war against the working class and oppressed. Inflation and recession, which particularly affect the poor, are ruling class tools to intimidate and suppress union organizing drives, strikes, and other worker struggles. Neither bourgeois party has offered any concrete proposal to deal with the inflation crisis. So let's look at a working class solution. Right now, labor unions have reached their highest level of approval in the US since 1965, according to a new Gallup poll. 71% of poll respondents said they approve of such organizations, up from 68% last year. Popular support for working class organizations like unions creates an opportunity to put forward effective working class programs that address wider questions like inflation and recession. China presents an example of what a workers' state can do. In June, the inflation rate in the US was 9.1%. But in China, the inflation rate was 2.7%. Why? In China, prices are kept under control by its government's National Development and Reform Commission, NDRC. This agency has the power to dictate to both private and publicly owned companies what the prices are set at. If the company has to swallow increased production costs for the welfare of the people, so be it. The NDRC is part of socialist planning. Unlike the US, China has just announced a lowering of interest rates by its nationally owned banks to stimulate the economy. And although the the PRC has billionaires, the workers' state can and does keep them under control. This is from Reuters just this week. A Shanghai court on August 26 sentenced Chinese-Canadian billionaire Zhao Zhihua, not seen in public since 2017, to 13 years in jail and fined his Tomorrow Holdings conglomerate 55 billion yuan, $8.1 billion, a record in China. Zhao and Tomorrow Holdings were charged with illegally siphoning away public deposits, betraying the use of entrusted property, and the illegal use of funds and bribery, the Shanghai First Intermediate Court said. His arrest in 2017 sparked the failed right-wing Hong Kong recolonization movement. But the US instigators of the subprime mortgage swindle, who reap billions in profits and bonuses, have all gone unpunished. One important fact is that China's lifespan has now surpassed that of the US. This is the times than elsewhere, which actually declined in the last couple of years to 76.1 years. This is because of the ineffective pandemic treatment with a non-existent healthcare system, public health system, plus the drug use and other effects of depression from the economic struggles that our class is going through right now. Whereas in China, this is the reported. This is from the UN. The reported lifespan is now 77.3 years, which is a year, more than a year, surpassing the US, which, as you can see from this chart, starting out in just 1949 or 50, when the revolution took power, it has risen from just above 40 years of age now to surpassing the US at 77.3, which is a remarkable achievement and a success for the socialist country. Now, several members of the squad, this is Congress people associated with, I guess, the Democratic Socialist Alliance, who are reformist progressives, co-sponsored a price control proposal for this country called the Economic Price Stabilization Act. The Emergency Price Stabilization Act will expand the existing White House Supply Chain Disruption Task Force, creating a new subtask force that is empowered to monitor and analyze price changes related to food, energy, housing, healthcare, transportation, and other goods, and services that are vital to the country's health and economic security. Proactively investigate corporate profiteering in those areas, including price gouging linked to supply chain disruptions, by using subpoena power to open and examine corporate books. Make recommendations to the president for appropriate strategic controls and regulations to limit growth and reduce volatility in those key prices, which the president is temporarily authorized to implement. Engage and mobilize the public as part of the process of monitoring and regulating prices, and harness the expertise of federal agencies, outside experts, unions, and community organizations, and propose complementary measures to ensure adequate supply of relative goods and services, expand productivity, capacity, and meet climate and public health standards in the application of any price controls or regulations. Now, we offer critical support to this kind of proposal. It would be a tremendous step forward. We aim continually to raise people's price control as a key part of the unfolding class struggle in the upcoming period of imperialist-spawned turmoil. We want to build the confidence within our class that we can manage the distribution of goods and services without the imperialist parasites and their inflation. But in doing so, we realize something that Marx raised after the Great Paris Commune a century and a half ago, that this struggle over inflation, like the key union struggles that are getting stronger every day, are over capitalist distribution. To permanently win those struggles means that our class must win the struggle over capitalist production, to wrest away control over the means of production from private billionaire owners, to impose socialist ownership and scientific planning for fulfilling human needs, not profits. End inflation and people's price control, stop the Federal Reserve spawned recession, forward to the socialist revolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. All right, thank you for that wonderful presentation. And let's have some discussions. I see a hand raised. I see two hands. Well, I see. I'm going to be taking stack. So I have Tova, Derek, and Mike. Okay, Tova, go ahead.
Actually, I hadn't raised my hand. That I was just clapping. That was a reaction, but I'll let somebody else go first. Thank you.
Okay,
And it
was
was a
clap.
great
Okay.
presentation. Thanks.
My bad. Okay. Let's just redo this. Let's have other folks who would like to contribute to the discussion. You can either raise your hand or just wave at me. I see. Okay, so please go right ahead.
Well, I want to thank Chris, first of all, for the PowerPoint and the presentation, and also for all the research and writing he's been doing on this. I think it's something that the left, seriously needs to analyze, because right now, the ruling class is giving us so many conflicting messages. On the one hand, they say it's a technical recession, meaning that it's been 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. At the same time, the Biden administration is saying, well, what recession? That it's not really a recession, because the job market is, quote, tight, unquote, and so on and so forth. So to try to wade through all that, is not an easy task to carry out. Tomorrow, they're supposed to release the jobs numbers for August. It'll be interesting to see, how that plays out. So what do you think, Chris, in terms of whether the U.S. is in a recession now or not a recession, or, as you said earlier, is it really important?
Well, okay. I guess what I'm reading from a lot of the bourgeois sources is panic. Panic because while it doesn't directly answer you the question whether now we're officially now in a recession or not, they're panicked by what they see on the horizon, which from their point, they have an easier time seeing what's in the future, because they're not working for a living. They are focused on accumulating profits, and they see a lot of problems doing that in the future, because their financial manipulations are getting them deeper and deeper into issues. This issue about raising interest rates means that a lot of the companies that you see today are in deep trouble, because if they are companies that are no longer able to make enough of a profit to sustain themselves, so they've been borrowing cheap money from the Fed, and the Fed has also been giving them, buying up their bonds, their corporate bonds, so their debt. Well, now the Fed is raising their interest rates and selling the corporate bonds at a bargain basement prices, which means those companies that were considered like investment grade, they call it, are now junk bonds. And now they can't afford any longer to pay their interest payments. So many of them are on the verge of bankruptcy. AMC Holdings, which owns a lot of theaters around the country, for example, is shutting down a lot of their theaters. Bed Bath & Beyond is shutting down 150 stores. They announced that today. You could go on to American Airlines is a zombie company. 20% of these companies are now in deep trouble. So yes, there's panic. So whether or not today we're in a recession, the future doesn't hold well for imperialism. And so I'll leave it at that and let other people talk.
Thank you, Chris. All right.
You, Chris. Could you comment on the news reports about a mass movement emerging in the United Kingdom of people refusing to pay, calling on people to refuse to pay their electric bills?
I'm trying to unmute. Okay. Okay, I did not see that report, I have to say, but I did read a lot of material about the trouble in the United Kingdom. They're projecting an 80% inflation rate going into next year. There is, as you know, right now, is when the US was at a 9.1%, United England was well over 10%. So and EU is not far behind that. They're all in deep trouble with this spike of inflation, and they are all threatening. And I should contrast that with China, which just announced that they are actually cutting their interest rates in order to facilitate development projects internally. So it's quite a contrast between the imperialist world and the socialist world there. I'm not trying to say anything denigrating other socialist countries like Vietnam or Cuba or Korea, but I am pointing out with China because they are the second most powerful economy in the world now, and so the impact of their success is really what's enraging and terrifying imperialism today. I hope that partially answers your question.
Okay, perhaps Dorothy or Payman would like to make a comment or a question?
Still muted.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are.
I'm Dorothy.
Dorothy Brown or someone, would you care to speak?
Yes, Chris, thanks for the presentation. I wonder if you could expand a bit more on, the relationship of China to the Silk Road, and not only other socialist nation states such as Vietnam or Cuba or Venezuela, but also in relationship to even, some capitalist nation states are involved in that as well, in terms of in your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. Yes, it's a very important question. The success of the Silk Road Initiative by China is phenomenal. One side of it is the People's Republic of China insists on, if they're going to join with the country to have substantial development projects, then they have to switch their recognition from Taiwan to the People's Republic of China. They have to make that obvious step. And you can see around the world the shrinking number of countries now, even under US pressure, that still recognize Taiwan. as China. And it's just to contrast again, I mean, I'm sure other comments like Abiyomi can tell what happens when the U.S. goes into to try to compete with China in development projects. They find them that all the U.S. can offer them are weapons, but China is able to offer them infrastructure projects to greatly enhance the internal development of their countries. I think other comrades can talk the success of that, but it's been phenomenal around the world. It is also, it should be pointed out in this time of the Russian special project in Ukraine, that countries around the world, particularly in Africa, have rejected U.S. pressure to join them in this proxy war, and that's a reflection also of not Russia's a capitalist country, but it's a reflection that countries in Africa and in Latin America and Asia and the Caribbean particularly are now free to be much more self-controlling of their futures than they were before. And I just want to mention the Solomon Islands, which is a small group of islands in the Pacific, in the South Pacific. And just the other day, they took the step of refusing a U.S. military ship entry into their port, and which shows they've been constantly attacked by the U.S. and by Australia for making relations with China, again, as part of this Silk Road Initiative. And they have defended their actions and feel not only justified, but strong enough to do that, which shows a really a new development in the world itself.
Okay. I think, Yama, you're raising your hand.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. David mentioned the campaign in the UK. It's called Don't Pay UK. And they're talking about the escalation in energy prices. And they're calling for people to boycott paying their energy bills starting on October the 1st. And there's another one called Enough is Enough, which is backed by the trade unions in Britain. So, you know, I need to read more on it, but these are efforts, and it would be great, you know, if us, you know, we could, or some, you know, a combination of groups could put forward some type of, you know, program in terms of price controls for you know, because not hearing a lot, you know, in this country about that. And it's a major, major problem. And obviously it's going to get worse if they're talking about, you know, layoffs now. Like Ford had announced, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, they were laying off 3,000 people. And Chris mentioned the other retail, you know, Bath and Beyond, that one. And there are others too, I've heard, you know, that are considering layoffs as well. So it would be great if, you know, we could do something here. Also, in terms of energy, I published an article earlier in the week on Algeria that the French president went there, try to make peace, whatever that means. And they want to increase their supply of natural gas from Algeria to France by 50%, which is substantial. And they're not going to be able to do it right away because they have to develop the capacity for it. But these are some of the maneuvers that are going on now in the NATO countries in terms of increasing purchase from other sources, you know, like Algeria and so forth. But even the French president said it's going to be a cold winter in Europe. So these things are not going to happen overnight.
Yes. I see, did I see a hand there?
Yeah, it's David.
David,
Yeah, so, it's important to note that at the beginning of this year, January, we made it, CWL through a mass organization, made an effort to mobilize for a bonus for inflation bonus for retired City of Detroit retirees. And we got a little play on it. We're not able to get a mass movement going, but it was discussed at City Council. They passed a resolution of support, but no action on it. And that was the first year of it was about 8% inflation for, this is 2022, so it's 2020. A fifth knocked out, and we may have to figure out other methods, other ways for approaching it. And like Abiumi, I don't see anyone on the left who takes on mass struggles. There's a lot of anti-imperialist talk, a lot of protest movements, but it's really not any group wanting to tackle the working class here. I don't know if it reflects a lack of faith in the working class. It may be that that's what underlies it. There are organizations stronger than CWL that don't seem to dare touch any mass movement. And it will be hard for us to find a way to do it, but we need to keep thinking about not just the City of Detroit retirees, but just about everybody. I saw Governor Whitmer in Michigan was talking about a $500 bonus for tax bonus, I guess, or a rebate for everybody who filed taxes to deal with energy inflation. So it's sad when the bourgeois politicians are thinking about some small handout, and the Marxist minds in the country can't come up with any kind of proposal or program that can be pushed. Anyway, we need to keep thinking about that.
yep,
Can I mention something about that too?
please.
I talked about the zombie companies. These are companies that right now, some of the pension funds typically demand that the funds that on Wall Street that they use to fund themselves are investment grade. And what we're standing on the threshold of is a lot of companies that are going to become junk bonds that are within these pension funds, which means that they will be selling them or dumping them, or they will be forced to dump a lot of their holdings at very low prices, which means that it will hurt, just as the Great Recession hurt a lot of pension funds like Detroit. In a similar kind of vein, this is going to hurt a lot of pension funds across the country when this happens. So your point is very well taken, that the struggle is going to be, we're not, in this country, we have not engaged in a real class struggle over these kinds of issues for a long time in many ways. I mean, some, and of course the support of the unions is definitely a class struggle, but the left organizations, as you say, have been not engaging with that. And when you think about it in terms of supporting, the best way to support the struggles against imperialism around the world is to build a strong communist, class struggling organization here to defeat imperialism here. So it's something we should try to build. I know it's really difficult to imagine, like this campaign, to build a campaign for price controls is really just theoretical at this point, although it's being raised by reform socialists. So we have an opportunity there to raise it. So, but it's important to think along those lines more and more.
Thank you. Hey, Chris, I have a question for you. When the Fed has jumped in and bought all of these corporate bonds with dollars that they have printed, they become assets to the Fed, as I understand it. And then what happens to these bonds that the Fed owns? Does the Fed try to sell them, and has their value diminished? And it would seem to me in the first instance, they've really given a lot of cash to these companies for their bonds. It's a great benefit to the companies. And I'm just wondering, what does the Fed do with all of this paper that they have bought?
Well, that's an excellent question. The answer is right now, besides raising interest rates, the other thing they're doing in a major way, but not as loudly, is they're selling those bonds. Now, they announced that 3 days ago too, that they are going to be selling these bonds. They picked up the pace of actually doing that massively. And you're right, when they bought the bonds, that was inflationary because it built up the, they were buying these bonds. It gave the big business, a lot of money to play around with. That's what the point of bonds are, is you're buying debt. So, but now they're selling them, and it does two things. It creates difficulty for these companies now, especially those that are on verge of becoming bankrupt, because their price of their bonds has now gone down. The government is selling them at low prices, and so people will either pay next to nothing for them or won't buy them at all, and they become worthless, which means that some companies will go out of business because of that. And that supposedly withdraws money from the economy. It's supposed to shrink inflation, but it doesn't really. It just drives companies out of business. We still will pay the high food prices, the high fuel prices, and so on. But it could have a devastating effect on millions of people's jobs because these companies will be forced out. And that the monopolies that are around in the same sector, let me bring this up, and because it's an important question. Here's a chart on here. This chart tells you about something about the effect of monopolies. It compares, it was 2010 to 2015. So 2000 to 2015, 15 years that included the Great Recession. And you can see on here, first on the left side, you can see how in the US, the monopolies, the change in their market share was much increased over like Europe. And that meant that they became even more predominant. Europe has a stronger anti-monopoly setup than the US. And then you can see the effect of that on the right side, where because there were more monopolies, they were able to raise prices over what Marx called the normal price, which is labor cost, labor power, monopolies were able to do that and are able to do that in the US even much more than in Europe. So it tells you something about the effect, as you asked, Jerry, about the purchases of bonds to sustain these companies after the pandemic particularly started, and then selling them now in order supposedly to stop inflation. What the effect of that will be, which is really to strengthen the hands of monopolies in this country. Let's see. Okay.
This is a chance for people who haven't asked a question or made a comment yet to chime in. Hi, Tova.
Hey, so yeah, I just kind of wanted to put some emphasis on the fact that again, this is a self-made crisis of capitalism, because this whole energy-related inflation all started because of the US aggression against Russia in the first place. So, you know, and they thought how they were going to bring down Russia with this, and who are they bringing down?
That's true.
So, you know, it's, you know, very interesting and important to bring that up in terms of, you know, the capitalism sowing the seeds of its own destruction.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they've had to, like France, for example, has had to go, you know, to Algeria, you know, one of its former colonies, who they have, you know, insulted over the last couple of years, to essentially, you know, try to cut a deal in terms of natural gas supply. But I mean, this is going to impact even here, because DTE Energy is talking about an 8.8% rate hike in this area. Yet we have this huge outage right now. Hundreds of thousands of people don't have power. They say it may be back on tonight or tomorrow, but you know, it's such a contradiction. They're raising rates, but they're not really investing in the infrastructure to meet the challenges of climate change. We're seeing these extreme weather events. Jackson, Mississippi is a good example. They had an evacuation order earlier this week. You know, it's the future in regard to climate change and other issues. It requires some really radical reforms at this point, even under capitalism. So the government is not really coming up with anything that's effective. The capitalist class is panicking. So, you know, it's going to be an interesting time period coming up in the next few months.
I did want to mention one thing about the environmental question and this crisis. The Democratic Republic of Congo a few months ago made an agreement to prevent oil companies from researching in the Congo River Basin, in the forest there, in the tropical forest there, which is a big carbon sink. It's 4% of the Earth's carbon processing goes on in that area. So it's vitally important that it continue to be there to do that in terms of trying to hold back climate change around the world. Well, what happened was that because of the price of food, the Democratic Republic of Congo has gone into deeper food crisis, with 22 million of its population now facing starvation. So, and at the same time, oil prices have shot up, of course, as we've seen at the pump. So what that has meant is the leadership of the Congo has now, whether or not this is a corrupt decision or not, has decided against its own decision before and allow contracts to be made and signed to receive money in order for oil companies to go in there and research the oil deposits in the Congo, which can by themselves, just the research can do damage to those tropical forests. So it tells you that this kind of financial crisis indirectly can have a big impact on the environmental crisis that we face today.
Maybe we should wrap.
Yeah, we've been on for an hour, but I did see that it's definitely something I found the source of what you're talking about. The DR Congo opens oil and gas auction round to carbon credit, so people can find more information on that online.
Okay. All right then. Well, I want to thank everybody for this interesting discussion. It sure has raised a lot of questions and points us in ways to look for our own answers and research on these topics, so that we can be better armed with theory and knowledge in the future to carry on the class struggle. So that's a good thing. So with that, I want to thank you, Chris, and I want to thank everybody else who's been on the webinar tonight for the questions and the comments. And please check out CWL, Communist Workers League. We have great writing, great journal articles for you to read all the time, and we'd love to hear from you. So I guess unless there's anyone with a final comment, I guess we can say thank you all and good night.
Good night. Thanks, Chris.
Good night. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah,
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, Chris.
We'll
Thanks.
see you. Good
Good
night.
night.